Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, I just sat down for an extended and very candid conversation with Miles Taylor. Now, you undoubtedly know who Miles is. He served in the first Trump administration, and when he saw the abuses being perpetrated by Trump and company, he couldn't remain silent. He couldn't keep it to himself, and he spoke out. He first spoke out anonymously in an op-ed that he authored for the New York Times titled, "I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration." Miles went on to author a book, also anonymously, a book titled A Warning. And Miles eventually revealed that he was the author, first of the op-ed and then of the book, A Warning. And so what did he get for standing up, speaking out, and bringing to the attention of the American people the abuses of Trump and company? Donald Trump issued an executive order claiming that Miles had committed treason. He didn't, and directing that Miles should be criminally investigated. So Miles and I just finished a long conversation discussing what he's contending with now, talking about the state of our democracy, and touching on his decision to keep standing up, to keep speaking out, to keep fighting the monster who's trying to end American democracy. Miles Taylor inspires me, and I hope our conversation will inspire you too.
Sign on. Are you ready? We got James Anthony Judine. Judine, who is, I was just telling Miles, Judine, that I mangled your name every time until I wrote it on a sticky. Oh, look at this. I actually have the sticky right here. Judine. and I promised Judine I would never mispronounce her name again. And the only downside, Miles, is there are so many great friends that come on that I feel bad because I can't run through all the names.
Judine, you can't make this up that just before we jumped on, Glenn was telling me, he's like, I got to write Post-its to make sure I don't mispronounce people's names. And then you pop right up. That had to have been planned. You guys are inspiring.
And then when my wife, Nilu, jumps on, everybody starts to forget about me and they say hi to Nilu, and I'm yelling at her in the other room as she's watching Substack. Listen, this is family. Substack is family. And, just the other night, 2 nights ago, I was at a fundraiser for Spanberger and some other Virginia Democrats. And I said, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to try to live stream the fundraiser. And it went gangbusters. And it was nice to be able to be independent media and get the information to the people immediately with no corporate sponsorship, no ads run on the channel, no editors. I was with MSNBC for 6.5 years. No kind of editors pushing you one way or prohibiting you from going another. Not that they did that much. I really enjoyed my time with MSNBC, but I'm telling you, independent media, I think, as you know as well, Miles, is the wave of the present, not just the wave of the future.
It is. And actually, look, I would add to that, and I mean this very, very seriously, is, you and I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, Glenn, but, I faced a decision that I discussed at great length with my wife about whether to go back out there and to be fighting back against this and to be open. And it's a scary thing. And I'll tell you why, because a lot of very intelligent people and great lawyers and folks like that will say, hey, you might be able to avoid further persecution from the president if you lay low. And that's not what we're going to do. And we don't think that's the right thing to do. And it may mean worse things happen to me. I mean, really, we acknowledge that very, very clearly. But you know what? This is wrong. And why is this relevant for new media? Because this platform makes it easier to get out there and just say the truth. There is no editor. There is no producer. There isn't someone standing in there to be that last voice to say, are you sure you want to tell that story or that anecdote about Donald Trump? Maybe keep that to yourself. That might poke the bear. No, that's not what we're trying to do. And so this really is an unfiltered place. And it couldn't be a better time for us to have new media exploding than this moment where we need unfiltered truth and transparency about what's happening. So, Glenn, I very much admire what you've done in this space, and clearly your loyal followers feel the same way because all of their names alphabetically by heart. And so we're going to start at the top of Glenn's biggest fans, and we're going to go from A to Z, and he's going to recite them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now I feel the pressure. No, but so let me say two things about that. One, if there is anybody who exemplifies not bending a knee, right, not obeying in advance, standing up, speaking out, staying strong, even at considerable risk, it's you. And we were together at Jim Acosta's show in DC a month or two ago. And I told you, I was inspired by you addressing the crowd about the fact that, let's face it, you are one of the marquee members on Donald Trump's enemies list right now, courtesy of an executive order. We'll talk about that in a minute. And you said, I'm not going to back down. I'm not going to get scared. I'm not going to hide under my bed. I'm going to stand up. I'm going to keep speaking out because we know that what he's doing is wrong. At the end of our chat today, I want to just talk from an old prosecutor's perspective about a little thing called vindictive prosecution that I am familiar with. It is a defense once somebody is indicted that is rarely deployed because, frankly, prosecutors very rarely vindictively prosecute somebody. But I want to talk a little bit about that. I'm sure you have a great legal team, but I'll finish up with that. So
but at the end of this conversation today, folks, I'm going to ask Glenn for a retainer agreement to become one of my lawyers pro bono, and when we'll sign it live here because I could only be so lucky to have Glenn on my team.
You wouldn't have to ask me twice to help you on the legal front. Let me tell you,
I'm grateful.
But okay, so with that, while people continue to sign on, let's get started here. Usually I have somebody count me down. They know the drill. One of the folks who signed on will have already said 3, 2, 1. I try to do that because that's a signal to the AI gods at Substack to start the video rolling that they end up. There you go, Kimmy. Kimmy got suits. Oh, let's see here. It's all roll. Bill, it's roll. Judine. All right. So I'm going to say 3, 2, 1. Welcome everybody. We've gotten through the pre-game nonsense, Miles and I, and you all have been discussing various things. But I'm thrilled to have my friend Miles Taylor here. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about him, then I'm going to turn it over to him to talk about not only his situation, but there are lots of other folks who have made an appearance on Donald Trump's enemies list, indeed, in recent weeks. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But let me start with Miles was a member first of the George W. Bush administration. He was a member of the Trump administration. He was a high government official at the Department of Homeland Security. And as you all probably know, if you know Miles' story, at some point he couldn't take it anymore, what he was seeing inside the Trump administration. And he penned an op-ed for the New York Times, did not sign his name to it. It was anonymous, and he has a brilliant reason and a very compelling reason for why he started down this road anonymously rather than jumping out there and using his name. He went on to write a book also anonymously called A Warning. And let me just tell you that the op-ed that he authored for the New York Times was, I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration. And, he has fascinating and horrifying stories to tell about his time in the Trump administration. Of course, for his patriotism, he has landed on Donald Trump's enemies list. And as horrific and uncomfortable and abusive and dangerous as it is to be an avowed Trump enemy, he's an extraordinarily good company. And I'm not going to list all the enemies that are on the list. We know all the folks that Donald Trump has been spewing his venom at for years. I call Hillary Clinton the OG of Donald Trump's enemies list because
That's right.
He was going to lock her up, and she's never been charged with so much as a traffic offense. That should tell you something about Donald Trump's MO. We're going to save that for a little bit later when we talk about the defense of vindictive prosecution. But let me turn it over to you. First of all, welcome, Miles. Thank you for joining us. We have a great group of folks here on Substack. And I want to start by just asking you, you can start anywhere you want, but I am interested in How are you doing today? Where are you today now that you've been attacked by executive order by Donald Trump? And how is that unfolding at the moment?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me, my friend. And, Glenn, I've got to say right back at you, you've displayed extraordinary courage these past few years when it's frankly very, very hard to consistently be out there on these issues. There's a lot of countervailing headwinds, as people will say, hey, it's much more profitable to go focus on this avenue or stay away from politics. I mean, look, it's the advice that musicians get. It's the advice that actors get. It's the advice that TV hosts get is stay away from politics. It's not a good direction to take your career. But, courageous folks like you have been out there shining a light, and I'm immensely grateful for it. But that courage has been met with a different term from the current regime, and that's the word treason. And that's why I named my newsletter on Substack treason, is because that is now Donald Trump's watchword for dissent. Is he sees the opposition, whether it's the free press in the United States, which, as my friend Jonathan Capehart reminded me, is the only constitutionally protected profession in the United States. He sees those people as traitors, as enemies of the people. He sees former administration officials like me who've come out and told the truth about how he is behind the scenes as traitors and treasonous. And he sees his own predecessors like Barack Obama, who you mentioned the other week, as treasonous. Why is that significant? Well, that's basically the highest crime contemplated in the Constitution. It's a crime punishable by death. But ultimately, this is also one of the biggest hallmarks you see in autocratic regimes from would-be dictators or rising dictators is their branding of the opposition as traitors, to put them outside the scope of the law and democratic norms and to contemplate them as enemies of the country. And that's really scary to me. I actually think of all of the scary things that have happened in this second term of Donald Trump. It is that word and his view of the opposition as traitors that is most indicative of what is happening to our country. So, of course, as you noted, Glenn, that we, me and my family are in the crosshairs from that. In April, the president issued an executive order accusing me of treason, accusing me of sharing state secrets, and those state secrets happen to be my criticisms of Donald Trump. So, to Donald Trump, criticism is classified. I do want to tell our viewers here, and I don't think any of them are deluded by Donald Trump in this. But you don't need a permission slip to criticize the president of the United States. Okay, folks? So if you haven't read your Constitution lately, you don't have to have a permission slip
All
to
you
criticize
really
the
need
president.
is a sense of patriotism. That's what
That's
you
right.
need.
That's right.
And a concern for a healthy democracy.
That's right. But they've tried to make it as painful as humanly possible. And some of you have heard my story before, and I won't belabor it and go into it. And I'm certainly not looking for sympathy. I'm talking about this all the time because I want people to understand what's happening in our country. Being added to his blacklist in April cost me a whole lot of things. Friends and family members who we expected to be with us, who were very scared about being brought into the crosshairs because of that. Financial security, physical security. We've been in court against people who've made violent threats against our family. And also, at the end of the day, it's meant, professionally, things that we had built, businesses that we had built have been decimated by this. And in fact, I had, a business that I had built that I was really excited about to move on from the public eye that was crushed by this executive order. But even after all of those things, you would think, Glenn, if you're just sitting on the couch and listening to the stories, think, well, then duh, of course you're going to go out there and fight back after the folks did that to you. But I'll tell you, it's not that easy. And I would like to say that my immediate gut instinct after April 9th was get out there and I'm going to fight these guys, because I did that 5 years ago. And I've already been in that game. I've got pattern recognition for fighting back. But it's hard. It's hard when you've got a family and you have to actually think through, do I want to invite more persecution? And I give all the credit to my wife, Hannah, because as we spent 2 months thinking through whether to come back out there and to fight this, she was really the moral center. She was really the one saying to me, look, honey, this may mean things get worse for us. It could even mean the worst for you. We don't think it's the likeliest scenario, but you said it earlier, Glenn. He wants to lock people up. He's talked about locking Hillary Clinton up. There's enormous pressure on Donald Trump to lock people up. And so, we think that that's somewhere on the spectrum of possible things that could happen to me. But you know what? Because of Hannah, I decided, no, I'm not going to shut up, because if we shut up, it makes it so much easier for the next person, the next person, the next person to get persecuted by this. And guess what? Since April 9th and those executive orders, they have started to threaten more people with investigations. They're going after former Obama administration officials. Those people are having to lawyer up. It is happening, and we have to send the signal that we can't be quiet. So look, the shorter answer to your question is, interpersonally, we're doing all right. I've got the best marriage on the face of the planet and an incredible partner, and a really strong and supportive, close family and set of friends. But we've had to make adjustments to our life. This is not my home that I'm in right now, and we've spent a good bit of time on the road and in different places because of some of the different threats we've been facing, and that's the reality of dissent right now in the United States.
Miles, and make no mistake about it, I don't need to tell you this. By standing up and speaking out and staying strong the way you are, in a very real and direct sense, protecting so many others. Because when I see the law firms that kind of, crawled in on their bellies to the Oval Office and gave Donald Trump, the bully, their lunch money without a fight, those law firms endangered literally everybody in America, not just lawyers and other law firms, but the law firms that stood up, that fought the monster instead of feeding the monster, that went to court and kicked his ass up one side and down the other. All 4 court cases, including 2 that were presided over by Republican appointed judges, said, are you all effing kidding me? You're going to try to punish lawyers and law firms that displease you for some reason or another by, among other things, telling them their lawyers can't walk into federal courthouses? Those law firms protected us all, not just lawyers and other law firms. You, by doing what you're doing, are protecting the American people. That's not hyperbole. That's reality. But everybody who lays down or hides under the bed or bends the knee or obeys in advance or gives the bully their lunch money without a fight literally endangers everybody else in America and frankly around the world. So I couldn't appreciate more the stand that you continue to take. Let me ask you to summarize for the viewers just a little bit of what's in the executive order that purports to punish you for being a patriot and speaking the truth.
Well, and I've got a comment on what you just said about lawyers. I'll put a pin in that for a second. Yeah, I mean, look, the president put out an order, and we knew at some point that we would be targeted in a second term. We didn't know what that would look like, but his executive order directs a federal investigation into me and alleges that I potentially committed something tantamount to espionage by unlawfully. I think the headline of the executive order is something like egregious leaker and disseminator of falsehoods. I mean, you couldn't have asked George Orwell to write something more Orwellian than that. And my crime, my egregious leaks and my false disseminations were truths about Donald Trump, things he wanted us to do during his first term when I was chief of staff at Department of Homeland Security, his inclination towards illegality, and spelling those things out very publicly for the American people so they could decide whether to fire or rehire Donald Trump in 2020 and 2024. And let me just say, first and foremost, I have zero regrets about that. None whatsoever. I would go do it again and again and again, Glenn. And I don't wish the challenges upon my family and my wife and others that have come from this. But I would do it again. And I would do it again because what we are seeing is so patently wrong. So Trump has directed that investigation into us. And I put a pin in the lawyer conversation because one of the things I wanted to tell you, Glenn, is in different times, if something like this had happened and an executive order like this had dropped, which, legal scholars have said the executive orders against myself and my former colleague, Chris Krebs, are the first time in American history ever that a president has issued an executive order directing an investigation into one of his critics for First Amendment protected speech. It's never happened in the history of the United States. I say that because in normal times, any of the major law firms in this country would say, that's great case law to go be a part of. I want to go defend that and take it to the high court and have them rule that this is unconstitutional. And it wouldn't be hard to go build a legal team In the weeks after this order dropped, one of the hardest things for us, after making sure our family was secure, after making sure that we knew what we needed to do from a financial standpoint to weather this storm, was finding a legal team to represent us. We went to some of the major law firms in this country, some of whom capitulated to Donald Trump, and doors were closed on us again and again and again. And I'm not going to lie, and I've not said this publicly, there was a period of total panic for us where we said, holy shit, we are not going to even be able to find legal representation. And this isn't like a case of, you stole the petty cash from the petty cash drawer and law firms are like, I don't know if I want to represent the guy who stole the cash. It's an order that's so blatantly on its face unconstitutional. We would have thought it was very easy to find legal representation. And at first, it was not. Now, I am happy to report that eventually we got plugged into the right channels and we have an extraordinary legal team. Amy Jeffress at Hecker Fink, who's a rock star. Abby
One of
Lowell.
my old trial partners, Amy Jeffers. I tried cases with her twice when she was pregnant. And remind me, I have a wonderful anecdote to tell about Amy. It doesn't get any better than Amy Jeffers. I'm biased.
She's just remarkable. I can't say enough great things. Abby Lowell, who's represented everyone from, former President Biden's son to Donald Trump's son and daughter. Abby's represented everyone across the spectrum. He was #1 trial lawyer in America last year. Mark Zaid, incredible national security attorney. I mean, I really lucked out with this extraordinary team of people who came forward and they knew what was happening. They knew big law was bending a knee to the White House, and that we would have to cobble together an ad hoc team to go against this. And I'll be forever grateful for those people who stepped up. But that's me, Glenn. And I consider myself much better prepared to deal with this than the people who are now on the receiving end of Trump's revenge orders, whether they're government civil servants who are being fired at the FBI without cause and because they were merely associated with Trump investigations, whether there are people let go by Doge, whether they were people who are being fired because they said something negative about Trump and they're serving somewhere in the United States military. I mean, this is happening everywhere. And those folks don't have the same capacity as me or network to go find the incredible legal team. And the bigger his target list becomes, the harder and harder it gets for people to defend themselves. So it is pretty scary. And that's one of the other reasons why we felt like it was important to be out there, is to keep shining a light, not just on our situation, but that the revenge campaign is continuing. And that's why I came onto this platform, is just to say, you know what am I going to do with my time now? I am just not going to stop. I am not going to shut up until this is over and he's gone. And I'm going to keep showing and showing and showing the people he's doing this to, because this is un-American. And I don't care if it's a Republican president doing it or a Democratic president. This is not about politics. This is about persecution, and it's un-American to its core. So that's why we're doing what we're doing, and that's why we're out there. And this week, and one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Glenn, is, I mentioned the FBI, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday with our friend Ryan Lizza, about just the unprecedented nature of federal law enforcement officers being targeted for their supposed political views. Now, FBI agents are nonpartisan, but the fact that they were even tied to investigations into Trump is costing people their job. I want to know what you think from a prosecutor's perspective. Purges like this, what does it mean for our justice system and the presumption that you're going to get an impartial investigative apparatus coming after you if they end up coming after you?
Now, a lot of my friends and former colleagues have been targeted. Some have been wrongfully terminated. Some have left. And I understand. And in my view, it's not obeying in advance. If you are a prosecutor, whether you're at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. and you're now laboring under Jeanine Pirro as U.S. Attorney, whether you're in the Civil Rights Division at Maine Justice and you are laboring pretty directly under Todd Blanche and Pam Bondi and Donald Trump, who is, there is no longer any separation between the White House and the Department of Justice, as most presidents recognize there must be if the people are to have confidence in the legitimacy of the Department of Justice. Donald Trump doesn't care about that. If they leave, they're not obeying in advance. They're saying, I cannot do the work that you're assigning me when civil rights goes from protecting voters' rights to suppressing voters' rights. You can't be part of that. You have to leave as really a way of standing up and speaking out. But the problem, Miles, is that there's not just a brain drain from the Department of Justice and all of the law enforcement agencies that fall under the Department of Justice. There's an ethics drain
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
some of the people who stay and are willing to go into court every day in the birthright citizenship case, in the, unconstitutional seizure of undocumented workers cases, in you can name the case after case after case that are the product of Donald Trump's lawless and unconstitutional executive orders and other presidential acts. These
Mhm.
lawyers that go in there, what they are doing, and they check their ethics at the door and they don't mind putting their license to practice law at risk. They're arguing to federal court judges that Donald Trump's lawless acts are lawful. Donald Trump's unconstitutional acts are constitutional. And Miles, I'm trying to track every time a judge says in substance, Mr. or Ms. DOJ lawyer,
Yeah.
I don't credit that. I don't believe you. It's contradicted by the evidence. When judges say that, you know what that results in? A referral to state bar counsel of that DOJ lawyer for an ethics investigation, sanctions up to and including possible disbarment. And how many Trump associated lawyers have been disbarred or are pending disbarment? Lots and
Mm.
lots. So
Is
there's
that,
an
I want to ask you,
ethics.
Glenn, is
Yeah.
that happening? And maybe you're the one person doing it. Is there a systematic effort to track right now those lawyers who are going out there and engaging in that misconduct? So either, concurrently or on
Yeah.
the back end of all of this, there's accountability?
It's a great question. I try to do it personally just for
Yeah.
purposes of keeping up. Every time I see another federal judge criticize a DOJ lawyer, I try to background that lawyer, see where they came from. You know what we're finding? So many of them have been with the Department of Justice only since Trump was sworn in the second time. These are
Yeah.
people who have no experience, they have no background, they're ill suited for, instantly going into court in some of our nation's most consequential cases, and they're exercising really poor judgment. That's giving them the benefit of the
Well,
doubt
but
that it's poor judgment.
some of them, Glenn, we're finding out were insurrectionists.
Yeah,
Some of the
that's a
people who are now in the Department of Justice. And even I am astounded by this. I mean, you warned about this. I warned about this. I said if Donald Trump came back, he was, of course, going to pardon these people
yeah.
who engaged in insurrection against the United States, which is extraordinary in its own right. I did not contemplate they would be so brazen as to take some of these people and hire them into the Department of Justice. So think about that for a second. I mean, listeners need to think about the fact that these people who broke into the U.S. Congress unlawfully, some of whom were urging the crowd to kill the cops,
Yeah.
are now being invited back into government buildings and given clearances to actually work within the federal government. And that was just exposed this week as there's a video of a guy who works in DOJ urging the crowd to kill the cops, who's now apparently a Justice Department official. We're so numb to all of these outrages, but that to me is extraordinary that the insurrectionists have now been invited into the buildings that they were trying to sack to lead the federal government.
They're making the criminals the cops, and they're trying to make honest, ethical cops the criminals. And it's not just this guy who was hired recently and I think made part of the weaponization of government committee that's being
Yeah.
headed up by who? An election denier, Ed Stop the Steal Martin. Talk about taking somebody who is beyond ill suited to be a high DOJ official. Ed Martin is now the pardon attorney because our
Yeah.
friend Liz Oyer, the former pardon attorney, got marched out of DOJ when she refused to sign off on a restoration of Mel Gibson's gun rights because he's a domestic violence offender. And so she was canned. And they put Ed Stop the Steal Martin in as both pardon attorney and head of the weaponization committee. The criminals are
Crazy.
beginning to run law enforcement. So, but here is, if there's any good news, I'm always looking for the points of light amidst the Trump-induced darkness.
For sure.
It's not sustainable. what they are doing, including sending people into court to argue that the unconstitutional is constitutional, this is not sustainable. There's a reason that we are seeing court filings that are signed only by political appointees, Pam
Hmm.
Bondi and Todd
Hmm.
Blanche, because they're having a hard time finding lawyers who don't care about their bar license to go in and do Donald Trump's dirty bidding in court.
Yep.
In essence, represent the interests of a corrupt, criminal, abusive president rather than the interests of the American people, which is what I took oaths to do, both in the military and at the Department of Justice. I did not swear loyalty to, as General Milley would put it, a tyrant, a dictator, or a person. I swore loyalty to the Constitution, and I was there to do the work of the American people. And listen, we're between a rock and a hard place. Do I want to see the 110,000 good employees at the Department of Justice flee? Well, then it implodes. It all
Yep.
implodes because I don't think they can find 100,000 employees to replace them who have
Yep.
no ethical bearing. I think
Mhm.
that's going to be a very, very difficult task. So this is not sustainable. This will implode. I think the way Donald Trump is governing is not sustainable, and I believe it will implode. Now, I don't know what that implosion looks like. I don't know when it might happen. I don't know how much damage he will do before the implosion, but this is not sustainable in my opinion. But and that's why we have to be fighting against it every day, because we are going to be the ones, Miles, you, me, and so many other patriots, so many democracy warriors who are going to have to be involved in the rebuilding mission once we right the
Yep.
American ship and the rule of law is reborn out, from the ashes that Donald Trump has created. So, but yeah, we're in a tough spot with respect
Well,
to the
Glenn,
Department of Justice.
can I ask you about? I want to talk about the pardon power for a second because I don't think this has gotten nearly enough attention. And I put out a couple weeks ago a sort of a scorecard of the things I was worried about going into a second Trump administration and what had happened already and what hadn't. And like 70% of those things had already come to fruition. But one of the ones that hasn't yet, but that I think is on their to-do list is the sort of end-to-end political weaponization of the pardon power. And I give an example about my firsthand experience in the Trump administration, which is there was an incident in which I mentioned to you where, we were at the border and Trump asked us to do something illegal and we said no. And the president said, well, if you go to jail, I will pardon you. And I've never witnessed personally a more corrupt act than the president saying, do something illegal, and I have this get out of jail free card that I can give you for doing that. Listen, folks, he will do that again.
Yeah.
And we haven't quite seen that. I think maybe with the Ghislaine Maxwell stuff, we're seeing potentially pardons, being dangled out there. But this could get really, really scary is that Trump could convince his aides to do things that are so nakedly unconstitutional. Just go arrest my adversary right now, even if we haven't filed charges against them. And don't worry, I can pardon you if you get in trouble for doing that down the road. He has the ability to do that. And so I want to ask you, one, why do you think we haven't seen him yet do anything that egregious? And two, do you think that that's somewhere in the pipeline? Does he start to take the pardon power and wield it to get people to do things that are just blatantly against the law?
Great question. And I'll start with the way the Supreme Court has ruled in a way that encourages the corruption of the presidency. Once they gave him absolute immunity, he doesn't have to worry about a self-pardon anymore, does he? Because
Yep.
he can violate the laws of our nation. He can victimize the American people criminally, and he can't be held responsible in a court of law. So, I always quote constitutional scholar, Yale professor Akil Reed Amar, who said the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling, in a very real and direct sense, ruled that the Constitution is unconstitutional. Because the express language of the Constitution says the president must take care to faithfully execute the laws of the country. Guess what? That's the exact opposite of the president can violate the laws of the country with impunity and immunity. That's just one way the Constitution contradicts what the radical right-wing bloc of the Supreme Court did. But to go to the pardon question, the Supreme Court has endangered us all by not only giving Trump presidential immunity for core constitutional functions and official acts. There's a rebuttable presumption he's got immunity for that, can be rebutted by prosecutors. But they've said that the pardon power is a core constitutional function. So he can wield it as it's like a gun in his hand. I think that's actually something Justice Sotomayor may have said in her dissent. Powerful dissent. It is a weapon in the hands of the president by which he can violate the law and victimize the American people. And there's not a damn thing that can be done about it. So you go to the next level. Okay, if he can commit crimes with impunity and immunity, what about when he directs other people to commit crimes? And what Justice Sotomayor said in her dissent was, and I think she said this, I've read so many recently, but he can direct criminal acts by his high government officials, his executive branch officials and employees, and then pardon them for those criminal acts. And everybody gets away with those crimes. That is no system of government that is recognizable to us here in America. I found it interesting that when Trump was asked recently, now that he said Obama is also on his enemies list and should be investigated and prosecuted for treason, he was asked, well, wait a minute, doesn't he have immunity just the way you have immunity now? And you could see the light bulb, dim though it may have been, a 15-watter, I think is what went off over his head. He said, oh, yeah, I guess that will help him considerably. But you know what? This is what Trump said. It won't help those people around him who might commit crimes. I don't know if he was trying to misdirect at that point because he should have known that that's bullshit, because he can pardon those people and everybody gets away with it. I don't think he is somebody who can think particularly quickly on his feet. But yeah, this is it's as dangerous as it gets if you're sanctioning criminal conduct by everybody in the executive branch. But I do see that as a realistic possibility.
You go to, folks go back to the oral arguments in that Supreme Court case. There was a hypothetical that was raised that truly at any other point in American history would have seemed like such a outlandish hypothetical. And that hypothetical that was raised was that, okay, well, if this is true, if this theory of presidential immunity is true, then wouldn't it hypothetically be legal for the president of the United States to direct SEAL Team 6 to go and assassinate one of his political rivals? Yeah. And you could almost see the Trump side of this argument squirming because they didn't want to admit it, but they had a hard time defying that logic that, well, yes, indeed, if there is presidential immunity of this level, he can do that. But to your point, Glenn, what the pardon power gives the president is the ability to then say those people who carry out that order, who might be who should be subject to prosecution for murder if they carried out that order, can simply be forgiven for it. And so it is not farcical to say right now that the president of the United States has the ability to go direct the murder in cold blood of one of his opponents, and he himself and the people who carry it out can get away with it. 5 years ago, that would have been something you and I said was not possible in the United States of America. It wasn't. Those people all the way up to the president would go to prison for that conduct. Today, that crazy hypothetical is possible. And I don't say that as some radical person. I say that as a guy who spent my whole career in the national security community, would have never contemplated that something like that could possibly happen. And now, I'm not saying that scenario is going to come to fruition, but you can imagine 1,000 others that could, that are very scary. And that puts us in truly uncharted territory. We've got 3.5 more years of this guy. And look, he goes to bed at night and he wakes up in the morning with fantasies about revenge. It doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to think that he will fantasize about different ways to wield that pardon power to do some very dangerous things.
And one of the things that surprises me about that hypothetical, how it played out in court, I was in court watching it, and when Judge Florence Pan cross-examined Donald Trump's lawyer, I use that term advisedly because she was not going to stop until she got answers, straight answers from him. And John Sauer, the defense lawyer for Trump, and now the Solicitor General, God help us, tried to dodge and duck and misdirect and weave unsuccessfully when she said, wait a minute, you're saying the position you're taking leads to the logical conclusion that the president can order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political opponent and he can't be prosecuted. And ultimately, the answer Sauer landed on, he didn't want to say, that's right.
Yeah.
What he said was, well, he can be prosecuted if he's impeached by the House, he goes to trial before the Senate, he's convicted on the article of impeachment and removed from office, then he can be prosecuted. Now, mind you, this is farcical. This is magical unicorn legal reasoning because there's no support for any of that. Impeachment and removal is not a condition precedent to criminal prosecution anyway. And now we are at a place, Miles, where it is viable. It's viable that the president could order something like that. I'll ask you, what do you think are the guardrails that exist presently that have stopped him thus far from doing it? Because he had an appetite, not only according to you, according to his own Secretary of Defense, Esper, he had an appetite for wanting the military to shoot protesters in the legs. And Secretary Esper said it was not only a question when he said, why can't we just shoot protesters in the legs? It was also a suggestion. Fortunately, it never ripened into an order. And I've done interviews with military experts on the responsibility, and I was an active duty Army JAG for 6.5 years, the responsibility of military members to, one, obey lawful orders, but two, disobey patently unlawful orders. What guardrails do you think exist right now,
Well,
if
look,
any?
And you know, and this is one of the things that Trump and his loyalists have said I was treasonous for, is that you mentioned the title of my Times opinion piece, part of the resistance inside the Trump administration, to be very explicit with people. I wasn't talking about resisting the president's lawful policies. I made very clear what I was talking about is resisting things that were illegal. That's not treasonous defiance. That's literally what we make every single public servant swear an oath to, is to uphold the Constitution and to disobey unlawful orders. That's the resistance I'm talking about. That's the resistance that we no longer see inside the federal government because they've made sure to squash it. And you know, I do worry about that, Glenn. I do worry about people not disobeying those orders. And that example that you give of Esper, I actually witnessed something about 2 years before that, before Mark was Secretary of Defense. Trump had said the same thing to us in private, that in fact, he had asked us, he said, you know, why can't we just shoot them? There was a migrant caravan coming to the border. And, you know, as I recall, we gave him a scenario of like, look, a lot of these are like pregnant women and children. And his response to that was, well, yeah, we'll just shoot them in the legs then. And, you know, we were abhorred by that. And we thought we had talked the president out of ever saying anything like that out loud ever again. And then I'm on a flight on Coast Guard One, which is was our plane in the secretary's office at DHS, and we're headed somewhere, and we're watching, I think, CNN, and we see the president talking about the caravan, and he says, you know, if they throw rocks at our border agents, we're going to use rifles, and he starts talking about shooting the migrants. And I remember we called from the plane Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis at the time, and basically said, hey, look, you know, your guys are down there now, because there were 6,000 troops co-deployed with CBP down at the border. We said, your guys are down there now, and we've said all we can to the president about how this is unlawful. You know, can you call him and say this is against the rules of engagement. Like we need someone else to come in and weigh in with the president. Just think about that for a second. The president of the United States multiple times over multiple years fantasized about shooting innocent people and had to have his senior staff call and tell him, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. Do you think right now he's just stopped fantasizing about those things? No, I don't think so. I
Who
think
are the
he still
guardrails?
does.
Who are making those calls that you
but
all
who are-
made when you were there? Yeah.
Who are the
Who?
guardrails? So, a long way to back in to an answer to your question, Glenn, but I don't really think there are guardrails anymore. They're certainly not the public servants. Unfortunately, the law is a withering guardrail. I do think the Article 3 powers, the courts are doing what they can, but are in a very fragile position. I ultimately think the answer, I really do think the only guardrail left is the people themselves. It is the people themselves. It's what Thomas Jefferson said was the ultimate guardrail. And if there is one thing Donald Trump is scared of, is he's scared of being unpopular. He doesn't want to be unpopular. He does want people to like him. And when he sees mass mobilization and people taking to the streets, and when comedians make fun of him, he cannot stand it. And so people speaking out is making a real difference. And it's not just about Donald Trump. And I wrote about this the other day. It's also his lieutenants. The thing they are most scared of, and I tell you this with firsthand experience of being on the receiving end of it, is not the hearings. It's not the lawsuits. It's not criticism in the media. They are scared about all of those things on a daily basis. They don't like to see in their media clips, if you're Secretary of Homeland Security, that you're being criticized. They don't like to see that they're being mocked on South Park, even though they're pretending they think it's funny. They can't stand being criticized. But the thing they're most scared about is you. They are scared of people going on social media and exposing their misconduct. They're scared of cousins or friends or family members sending them emails and saying, what are you doing? Why are you defending this? They are terrified of this. They're scared of going to dinner and someone turning and saying, I can't believe you're still working in this administration. They're scared of a petition with 2 million names on it that, pushes back against a Trump policy. They are terrified of that. And I can remember cabinet level people in the first Trump administration who were seen as his stormtroopers being terrified to go out and give public remarks where the audience might be given a microphone and be able to do Q&A because they didn't want to be confronted by you. And now what I'm not saying is that we should go mimic the mob's tactics and go harass them in public. That's not what I'm saying. We don't want to mirror the mob that we're trying to stop. What I am saying is, in a civil and consistent way, call them out, because it makes a difference. This even happened to me when I was in government. Before people knew, Glenn, that I was inside the administration trying to push back against every psychotic thing that I saw, before people knew that I was writing that anonymous opinion piece, I had people in my own life, friends from church 20 years ago, friends that had gone to grad school with me, confronting me and saying, where is the line, Miles? At what point are you going to resign and say something? And I tell you what, that left a searing image in my mind. It made a huge difference to see what people in the public were saying about the actions of the Department of Homeland Security under Donald Trump and how that message got to me. It works. And so if people think for a second that old kindergarten adage of, one person can make a difference doesn't really matter, they're wrong. In fact, it matters more than ever that you stand up and say something, because that message does get to them. They are listening. They are terrified. They don't want to be held accountable, and you can hold them accountable. And I think it's truer now than it's ever been.
Yeah, well, that's great. And, the guardrails are you, me, the 1,400 people on this call, right? We really are the guardrails, and we have to keep speaking up. We have to keep, standing strong. I interviewed Senator Whitehouse about a month or two ago, and I asked him, what can we do more of? What can we do better? Tell we the people, how can we, better engage? And he said, look, everybody's got a cell phone. He said, one thing, and this kind of runs parallel to what you were saying. Everybody has been impacted by something Donald Trump and his corrupt administration have done. What you need to do is flood the zone with personal stories about, and he said, I don't care if you have 2 followers, 200 followers, 2 million followers, flood the zone every day with personal stories about how you have been harmed, how your loved ones have been harmed, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers have been harmed, because that is going to create public opinion. It's going to create pressure, and pressure bursts pipes. So there's so many ways that we can engage that we maybe don't intuitively think of engaging. But we, everybody, all of the friends listening to us and participating in this conversation right now, we are the Guardrails. Let me ask you a few things. First of all, without divulging anything that you shouldn't divulge, with respect to what's going on in your, I don't want to call it a case because I hope it's not a case, but your circumstance, being on Trump's enemies list, having an executive order, claim that you committed crimes when you clearly didn't. Um, do you know what stage that investigation is in? And I think from an old prosecutor's perspective, one thing that would give you some very clear, concrete indication of where DOJ may be, and I hope they're nowhere if they have an ethical attorney left, is whether anybody received the grand jury subpoena, whether any grand jury proceeding has been initiated. Do you have any info? If you want to share it, do you have any information on that front?
There's a couple things that I can't say, but in general, we think there is activity underway. What's alarming about that? Well, there's a lot of things that are alarming about that, but if you're being investigated by your government, Glenn, you probably have a sense of what crime you committed.
Yeah.
It's a really chilling thing that in this country, people like me and Chris Krebs would be getting investigated and have no idea what we did wrong. And my attorneys really early in the process told me a term I'd never heard before, and they called it an investigative risk. And their point was, look, the president has clearly determined in his own mind that you've committed treason. Now he's basically directing his administration to go find evidence of anything, evidence of a crime. And by opening an investigation, they go on a fishing expedition. And the risk is that in the course of that, as they ask you questions and people questions, whether it's about your taxes or your time in government or your business, that they find a thing that they can put a hook into to make your life very difficult. And we think that's the likeliest thing that we'll be dealing with here is what they call investigative risk. In other words, that they'll try to create an opportunity to find some sort of criminal violation to come at us with. That sets a really, really terrifying precedent. And it's not just about me. It's about all Americans. That means it can happen to you. That means it makes it easier for government investigators to normalize that culture of just going after a political target and finding a way to attack them. And even more broadly than that, to the thing you said earlier, Glenn, about the security risks to folks. I was meeting this week with a group of not political folks, a group of authors, and a bunch of different people who write business books and nonfiction. And a lot of folks in this group of authors are starting to see that the crowdsourced violence and intimidation in the political sphere is bleeding well beyond the political sphere. And I was talking to this group about ways that they should protect themselves, their physical protection and security, because this environment of target your enemies and send the mob after them in politics is now expanding elsewhere in our society. And I know viewers right now see it. You see it in your own communities. You never imagined in your small town that your mayor would be met with death threats for a city council decision. And now those things are happening.
School board.
Boards.
Yeah.
And that started somewhere. And statistically, you can show a huge spike after 2016 and what happened with crowdsourced violence. And so this isn't just about Democrats or Republicans or critics of Donald Trump being pursued. This is about you. This is about your communities being less safe because this is being normalized on the national stage. That's what we're fighting against. That's why it's so important for people to speak out about these things, is because we cannot show that it's okay to take your enemies, to put crosshairs on them in the public domain and let the mob do the rest of the work. That's not okay. That's not the country we want to live in. That's not the society we want to live in.
Yeah. Let me, I don't know how much time you have, but I want to touch on two things that probably don't give you much comfort or consolation, but I think they're important data points for what Donald Trump's MO is, what it has always been, and why, in my opinion, as a career federal prosecutor, we are very unlikely to see anybody on Donald Trump's enemies list indicted. That's not to say they can't find something on someone that is entirely unrelated to their government service or what have you. But when we think about the people who Donald Trump has been railing against, some of them for years, some of them for a decade, people he was going to prosecute. I can't possibly list all the names, but let's start with Hillary Clinton. Lock her up. I'm going to prosecute her. A decade or more later, she hasn't been prosecuted for so much as a traffic violation, right? But you've got Hillary Clinton, you've got Liz Cheney, you've got Adam Kinzinger, you've got Adam Schiff, you've got Alvin Bragg, you've got Letitia James, you've got Fani Willis, you've got you've got Chris Krebs, you've recent additions in the past week or two, you've got James Comey, you've got John Brennan, you've got Jack Smith, if I haven't said him. We even have an urge to investigate, a complaint to investigate Judge Jeb Boasberg, which is just laughable. And it goes on and on and on. I could spend the next 30 minutes listing people that Donald Trump was going to prosecute.
Yep.
There hasn't been a single indictment of any of those people. That gives me not comfort, but a lot of data and we could also say, listen, when he told President Zelensky, yeah, I know you want the money the Congress has appropriated to you. I need a favor, though. I need you to announce an investigation into my political opponent. I don't need you to conduct one. Just announce it, right? What did he tell his DOJ officials in 2020 after he was told not only that he lost the election, but there was no fraud undermining the election's results? I don't care. I don't care. Just say there was and leave it to me and my allies in Congress. How many data points do we need that Donald Trump's MO is announce an investigation, announce that one of his enemies has committed a crime, and just let it permeate the public consciousness? We're not going to indict anybody. Again, this doesn't give you or anybody a comfort level or confidence that they won't gin up some kind of an indictment. But here's the thing. I lived for 30 years in grand juries and courtrooms and loved every day of it. And yes, a corrupt prosecutor can go into a grand jury and indict a ham sandwich. I always say if a ham sandwich committed a crime, I could indict a ham sandwich too. But a corrupt prosecutor has to find a corrupt FBI agent, and they're really hard to find, to go in and lie that people committed all these treasonous crimes when they didn't. Even if you can get a corrupt prosecutor and a corrupt FBI agent to dupe the grand jurors, members of the community, sitting as the conscience of the community, get them to return a bogus indictment against somebody, it then has to be run through the federal courts. And let me tell you, I know the federal court judges in D.C. And some of the surrounding jurisdictions. They don't play. They are not going to let an evidence-free, baseless, vindictive prosecution successfully proceed through their courtroom. At least nobody but Aileen Cannon, right? And maybe one or two other suspects. So I believe federal judges have been points of light. They've been protecting us against Donald Trump's lawlessness and unconstitutionality, and they've been doing wonderful work. But the Supreme Court, I get it. But the trial court judges, the federal circuit courts of appeal, the appellate court judges, they've been protecting us against Donald Trump's abuses. They will cram a vindictive prosecution down the throats of the DOJ lawyers who are foolish enough to go in to try to bring a vindictive, evidence-free, baseless prosecution, because they're going right to bar counsel after the federal judge dismisses the case. Now, vindictive prosecution is not often raised as a defense, but it is a legitimate defense to somebody who, for example, had the president say, this person is treasonous, just go investigate them, find some stuff and charge them with something. Miles, that is a marquee example of a vindictive prosecution. Will give you no comfort, will give none of the folks on the enemies list any comfort if they have to suffer a vindictive indictment only to win a motion to dismiss. But it's something, right? It's something. And I don't.
It is.
Go
I'm
ahead.
glad that you say that, because we need to give folks some comfort that the system can work and that there is still an ability to turn the tide against these things. Um, and I would also note, Glenn, if you think back to the McCarthy era, we now know the stories very well of, people in Hollywood, for instance, who were accused of being communists, and, engaging in seditious conspiracy, and simply being on McCarthy's blacklist cost them their jobs and their careers. And it's a lesson that Trump and his team have taken on board, because I think they know that you are right. I think they know ultimately these things won't hold up in court. And so they've resolved that the process is going to be the punishment for these people.
Mhm.
And I don't say this for sympathy. I say this just for folks to understand it. I never imagined my business partners, who I thought were completely behind me, would seek to dissolve our company because of concern that Trump would come after them too. I never thought something like that would happen. And yet we are seeing things like that happen because the social fear is spreading to any of the people who are those targets. And, a court's not going to be able to provide me relief from that. But I go back to what we said earlier. You know who can? You all can stand up. And I don't mean to come to defend me. Anytime you're seeing this, a Michael Feinberg from the FBI gets pushed out of the FBI for doing the right thing. An Obama administration official is investigated. A local leader in a state that Trump doesn't like is attacked by him. The best way to make that blacklist not work is that we immediately rush to the defense of those people. And I'm hell bent on doing that for at least the next 3.5 years, is whatever impact, the treason Substack has or other things that I can do publicly. I want to keep shining a light on those people so that we rush to them instead of run from them, because that's how we enable it. If we run from them and we're really scared that we're going to get caught in the crosshairs too and be criticized, then it just works. Then that blacklist, they don't have to do anything in the courts. They don't have to succeed with the prosecution. The blacklist works and they can go ruin lives with the stroke of a pen. But if we run to those people and defend them in those moments, we deprive the White House of that. They no longer have that tool. They can't use the bully pulpit to be the biggest bully in the history of the United States, because we show that we are even bigger than they are. And I am heartened, Glenn, because I think folks like you have started to really rally people to do that. And I think it was a very scary first few months of this second administration. And I'm starting to see silver linings here of folks who are really waking up and saying, you know what, we are going to go stand behind these people. And this is not the country that we're going to live in. And that gives me a lot of heart.
Yeah, but we couldn't end on a better sentiment than run to the people who need our help and our support, who are being abused by a corrupt, criminal, runaway government. If we run to those people and we support them, listen, I've been saying for a very long time, no one prosecutor is going to save us. No one judge is going to save us. Certainly no one politician is going to save us. Let's face it, if the Democrats could have saved us, they would have saved us already, right? They've been doing what they can. But you know who's going to save us? We are going to save us. And I believe we are going to save us. We've been through a lot as a republic, and we've saved the republic before. And now it's our time to do it again.
Well,
so
Glenn,
let me
can I
ask you,
ask? Can I
go
ask
ahead.
the group one thing? And you and I talked about this before, and this is not just about my situation. Is if folks do one thing right now, is there's an organization that is working with me called Whistleblower Aid. They're an amazing nonprofit group that has represented whistleblowers from, you mentioned Ukraine, the anonymous intelligence community official who broke that whole thing open was represented by Whistleblower Aid. They created a legal defense fund called endpresidentialrevenge.org. It's www.endpresidentialrevenge.org. Yes, it's helping me and my family fund our legal defenses, but it's beyond us, as we're realizing there are so many people being targeted by presidential revenge that this is the thing I want to commit myself to pro bono for the next few years, is trying to grow that defense fund as big as possible. So the next person who's caught in the crosshairs doesn't have to spend 2 months with their wife and their family saying, can we even afford to fight back against this? That should not be something people have to think about. Now, you don't have to donate to it. You can if you want to, but people can go sign that pledge there at End Presidential Revenge to be a part of efforts to go rush to the defense of anyone who's caught in the crosshairs. And there's a number of folks that we're talking to right now to see if we can go help them you've seen them in the news, people who've been hit in recent weeks by this. And it's really hard for these civil servants to figure out if they can even afford to defend themselves. That's insane. That should never, ever, ever be a problem. And even if it's just moral support that we're offering those folks, we need to build the community around that. So grateful to anyone who wants to just be a part of that team to get out there and back people in those circumstances. And also, Glenn's done a remarkable job with Team Justice in corralling a big community in that regard. So I could not be more grateful to folks that are tuning in and listening here. Y'all are on the front lines of this.
So Miles, give me the name again really slowly so everybody catches it. I've seen some comments.
Yeah, it's endpresidentialrevenge.org. And I'm going to type it in here too.
Good. Yeah, this is sort of in keeping what I've been doing at all of the rallies that we've been having out here in Northern Virginia. There are organizations, and this is not an intuitive way to engage, to get involved. There are organizations that are in court every day fighting for our rights. Organizations that are winning the birthright citizenship battle in court over and over and over again. But you know what? They're not our lawyers. We don't retain them. We don't pay them. But in a very real and direct sense, they're fighting for our rights. They're protecting us from an abusive president. So, I almost hesitate to begin spitting out the names of some of these organizations for fear that I'm going to leave out some really great ones.
Yeah.
But I mean, just on the birthright citizenship case, for example, you've got the ACLU, you've got the NAACP, you've got the Asian Law Caucus, you've got the Democracy Defenders Fund. I mean, these are, in a real sense, they're our lawyers. They're fighting for us in court. We need to support them. And like you say, that doesn't just take the form of donating money, though that's the way, one of the ways I choose to support them. Call them, ask what kind of help they need. You can knock on doors. You can help corral folks and make them understand that they're our lawyers. They're fighting for our rights, but we're not paying them, but we need to support them. We need to run to them.
Well, there's someone for a second I have to call out in that regard, Glenn, is a number of you follow Norm Eisen. You've seen Norm out there. He's helped with dozens and dozens of cases out there in this administration. There are few people, and I don't know Norm terribly well socially, but there are few people I owe greater thanks to than Norm, because after all of this happened, and when we were trying to figure out how on earth are we going to protect our family, he was one of the first people that reached out and said, listen, I've got your back. I will help you put together a world-class legal team. This will not stand. And I get chills as I say that, because when you're in a moment of crisis like that, nothing compares to someone who shows up, doesn't have to, has everything to lose from standing next to you and says, I'm going to help you out. And I cannot tell you how badly I want to make sure that I give other people that feeling over the next few years, that they aren't alone when this happens, and just appreciate everyone who can help do that through any of these different organizations. And Norm runs a great organization and runs that Democracy Defenders group, and so folks should check them out and follow them for sure.
And I wanted to say that the Democracy Defenders Fund that I mentioned is Norm Eisen's group. And Miles, I'll end on this. We could talk all day. As soon as the Supreme Court handed down what I thought was a horrific ruling, I always have the Jerry Seinfeld Soup Nazi episode in my head when I say this, because the ruling was no nationwide injunctions for you, which is insanity.
2 years.
yeah, go ahead. 2 years. But which is insanity, because basically what the Supreme Court was saying was that, the litigant who had the means to hire a lawyer and get into court and protect herself from an abusive, unconstitutional act by Donald Trump, you're protected, but no nationwide injunctions for everybody else who maybe doesn't have the means to hire an attorney and get, but what the Supreme Court did, now I'm going down into the Supreme Court weeds here, is they said, but you might be able to accomplish the same thing by bringing class action lawsuits. I think 2 hours later, Norm modified, amended his complaint with the Democracy Defenders Fund.
It was amazing. I saw it in the heart.
And boom, what did we get? We got a class action lawsuit that protects every infant born in the United States, born on U.S. soil, such that the Constitution says you are a citizen. Every infant born after the 20th of February 2025, the day after his hateful attempt to take a Sharpie and cross out the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship. And I love this part, every infant who is yet to be born, but who will be born on U.S. soil. Bang! Class action certified, basically accomplishes the same thing as a nationwide preliminary injunction. Thank you, Norm, and thank you to all those other groups who were involved in that litigation that I named. So these are the people we have to keep running to.
Oh, one last thing from me,
Yeah.
Glenn. If folks who are listening can do me a favor, even if it's just a couple of them, when Glenn finally posts this, tag Norm Eisen all over the comments. I want Norm to see this. I don't want me or Glenn to send it to him. I want you to send it to him. Make sure that Norm knows that that type of work isn't going unnoticed. Is there are people who are just, I mean, burning the midnight oil on this. The fact that Norm turned that around in 2 hours, it would take a big law firm, 6 weeks to make that kind of shift and say, here's the strategy we're going to follow. Those guys, they are the SEAL Team 6 of defending democracy. And there's a bunch of others out there, like you mentioned at ACLU and then AACP and elsewhere. But go tag them in the comments. It's important for people to know that they're being recognized for doing great things. So harass Norm with good sentiment on Substack and on Twitter and other places. So thanks for doing Glenn and I that favor.
Great stuff. And also, please subscribe to Miles' Substack. It is must reading, critical reading. He's one of the people we have to run to help and support. And where else should people look for you, if anywhere?
treason.substack.com, and you guys can find me on other social platforms at just at Miles Taylor USA. So I'm out there at on Blue Sky and on Instagram and on X and other places like that. And just again, I know it's a total love fest when you tune in. You see people just patting each other on the back, but such a big fan of Glenn and what he's done. And Glenn, the folks that are on your team and on Team Justice are really following a leader. And this is probably the hardest environment in modern history to be a leader in the United States. There's a zillion reasons not to poke your head out there publicly. It is thankless, and you keep doing it. And I just admire it so much, my friend. So thank you.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you for being with us. I know all of our Team Justice friends here appreciated it. And anytime you need me to run your way, you just call.
I'm grateful. Thank you, friends.
Have a good one.
See you.
See you, everybody.